Hello, and welcome to week 2. So we're really happy to have with us this week Chris Henderson,
Good to be here.
who's professor of international law, and for reasons that will become apparent immediately, this is an opportune time to talk. But first of all, tell us a bit about yourself, where you hail from, how long you've been here.
Okay, thanks, Amir. So I joined Sussex in 2015.
Right.
Yep, time flies.
Time flies.
And I'm currently Director of Student Experience alongside being Professor of International Law. And my role as the dozy,
Yeah.
as they call it, essentially revolves around ensuring that students are doing well academically.
Mm-hmm.
So I work with a lot of staff, both within the school and also in the student centre as well, to ensure
So school, law, politics, and sociology.
Indeed, across the whole school, not just law.
Well, yep.
And we work together to try and ensure that students are doing well academically, but also to try and ensure that their general well-being is looked after as well.
So student experience, broadly conceived.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. What kind of things does this relate to in terms of well-being? Well-being is kind of a broad term.
We do have a lot of issues, of course, with students who have certain disabilities or certain issues in regards to learning which need to be met, and we just have to make sure that they are met within the learning environments and, of course, more broadly across the campus as well.
Okay, so this is within the classroom, but outside the
Indeed,
classroom.
absolutely.
So you're the person to go to. People have issues. So you refer them sometimes, but sometimes it's you actually dealing with them and reasonable accommodation.
Both dealing with them directly and having interactions with them directly, but also referring them on and dealing with support services across the university and also within the school.
Okay. The international side, the reason we're talking this week, we try to choose a kind of hook for our guests, is because there's an ICJ case, International Court of Justice, case rumbling along in The Hague, surprisingly between Israel and South Africa. The Israel part is less surprising. The South Africa one is a bit. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yep. So just to put it into context, we actually do a trip to The Hague,
Okay.
which is where the International Court of Justice is based. We do that every year with the LLM students. It's a great trip, and we just so happened to be out there this year when this decision.
When this was happening. Yeah.
When this was handed down. So we arrived there on Friday lunchtime at 1 o'clock, just as it was all taking place, and it was quite an atmosphere outside the court. And you can just imagine there were the Palestinian supporters on one side, the Israeli supporters on the other. There was a big sort of screen put up, and they were broadcasting live what was taking place in the court right next
As
door.
if it's a football.
Exactly. Lots of police around, police on horses. So for the students,
and against supporters as well. You know, it's kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for the students, it was great because they could actually see law in action, what was taking place in this Grand Peace Palace. And I've got a couple of photos which I'll pass on. They could actually see it happening at that time. So it was a good experience for them.
So obviously, there's kind of almost this circus of politics. But underlying it is a very, very serious allegation legally.
Yeah.
So can you unpack that for us as well?
Well, just to go back to your previous point, Amir, why was South Africa involved? Well, this was all about what's taking place in genocide, taking place in Gaza, and whether that constituted genocide. And genocide is seen to be, and I think the ICJ confirmed that it is an obligation which essentially all states, not just a victim state, has an interest in protecting.
So not to commit genocide.
Not to commit genocide, exactly. So South Africa brought the case against Israel, and I think a very significant thing that happened on Friday was that the ICJ confirmed that it has jurisdiction to hear the case, and South Africa does indeed have that standing to bring the case. So that was a very big, important takeaway.
Which was not an obvious thing, because Israel contested. Because, again, South Africa is an unrelated party. This is Israel, Palestinians, etc. South Africa is... does that have any precedent that a state brings a case against another state in which it seemingly doesn't have any...
Well, in this very context, in regards to genocide, actually, just a couple of years ago, we had the Gambia who brought a case against Myanmar for what was taking place in the territory of Myanmar against the Rohingya Muslims. So we have exactly the same precedent there. So the ICJ here was really sort of reaffirming that, in this case, what it had done or had held previously a couple of years ago.
So this is kind of almost an interim or provisional, I'm not sure what the language...
Exactly. So the big question was the ICJ going to order, and he would use that word, order Israel to cease what it's doing in Gaza.
That's ceasefire, the famous.
Exactly. So stop all military operations, which South Africa claimed was leading to genocide taking place. And that was the big question. And the ICJ didn't do that. It stepped away from that and essentially requested or ordered that Israel do everything in its powers to make sure that genocide doesn't take place.
Right.
So some saw that as a victory for Israel and reaffirming its inherent right of self-defense. I don't think it was quite like that, because what the ICJ did do was say that it's at least plausible at this stage, through the information it had, that genocide was being committed, and therefore it felt the need to actually issue these provisional measures.
Right.
So it wasn't so much of it as a win for Israel or for South Africa. It was perhaps more correctly seen to be more of a draw.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. If we can stretch that sports analogy, and when can we expect a final decision?
Well, the cogs in the ICJ turn very slowly, and it is incredibly busy at the moment. It has a real backlog.
Okay.
So it issued this within a couple of weeks of the hearings in the ICJ,
which is very fast.
Which is very fast. Yeah, it doesn't normally happen that quickly. But the actual merits phase of the case, where it would actually decide not whether there's a plausible case of genocide, but whether genocide was actually taking place, won't be for another 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
Some persons will graduate. I'm kind of guessing what your answer will be to this. But do you think this is a good time to study international law? I mean, the world is heating up.
Yeah.
International law involves obviously military operations, where it's sadly happening, at least two famously, Ukraine and Gaza, but also Sudan and other places, conflict zones. But international law is more than that, right? It's corporation, it's also climate, those kind of things.
I mean, I think it's an incredibly good time to study international law in sort of broad sense, and linking the idea about studying international law with what was taking place at the ICJ is that international courts and tribunals are incredibly popular now. States see a real value in going to these courts and tribunals for whatever reason,
which wasn't the case in the past. It's not an obvious thing.
It's getting more and more. It's more and more the case that states are resorting to them, and so international law is more prevalent, I think, in that way, and states see a value in it for whatever reason. That perhaps they hadn't 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. So, and it's interesting because people did expect, in that respect, if we kind of circle back to the Israel-Palestine-Gaza issue, people did expect that there's at least a chance that Israel would simply decide not to show up. But they are taking it really, really seriously.
Yeah.
Both with appointing a judge, probably the most famous judge in Israel history, Alan Barak, formerly president of the Supreme Court in Israel, and also taking a good team, a strong team of lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah, so states are justifying their actions under international law. They are showing up, as Israel did then.
Can you say something about the conditions that are necessary to establish that genocide has taken place? Because people have said that Israel's government and politicians are not doing themselves any favors in terms of what they're saying.
No. This whole thing arguably wouldn't have arisen if those statements hadn't been made.
So what statements are we talking about?
Certain Israeli officials, fairly high up, of course, in the Israeli government and military, made certain statements that could be taken to incite or refer to the incitement of genocide.
Right, so eradicating the population.
Exactly, eradicating the population in part or in whole, and taking certain measures to ensure that they are destroyed, essentially. So at this stage, it only had to be shown that these were plausibly inciting, or it was plausible that they were inciting genocide. When it comes to the actual merits, the decision stage, they're going to actually have to show that it's the only inference you could draw from them, and I think that's probably where South Africa
that there's an intent to
destroy in whole or in part a particular protected group.
Yeah,
like
because
Palestinians.
That's where the lines are drawn, as it were. Because I'm not sure if this is still the sports analogy, but because Israel obviously has a right to self-defense, like any country, it could be that it's acting in a way that's disproportionate. It's one step further to say, if I understand correctly, that it's actually genocide. That means you're taking it. It's even beyond disproportionate measures in war. Yeah, it's actually trying to eradicate.
It's a good use of the word proportionality, because that is a part of this right of self-defense. You can exercise the right of self-defense, but it has to be proportionate. Yeah. It was notable that the court didn't say anything about self-defense. I mean, it didn't need to in some respects because this was about genocide. But there's an argument to be made that it didn't order the cessation of hostilities because it implicitly recognised that there was a right of self-defense here, but that could not be exercised through the perpetration of genocide.
Okay. Circling back, if people want to learn more.
Okay. Come and study international law at Sussex.
Okay, so undergraduate, postgraduate, what are the options available?
Yeah, we do two main, public international law is quite broad, of course. We do two main public international law modules in the autumn and the spring semester at the undergraduate level. We also do an LLM in international law. We also do LLMs in international human rights law, for example, as well, where students have the option to study a broad range of subjects across the discipline as a whole. So it's very good. And as I say, part of that is this trip to The Hague, which is an integral part of it and is always very much fun as well.
Yeah, it turns out really, really exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Chris, for joining us.
You're welcome.
I know your time is tight, but really much appreciated.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks very much.